Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Mary Newport. I'm going to just chat a little bit here while people are starting to come on. I spoke and did a live event yesterday, and there were many questions at the end of this, many questions that I didn't get to answer. I know that many of you have seen this yesterday, and I am going to repeat myself a little bit to tell people who were not present yesterday a little bit about myself and how I got involved with ketones. And then we're going to talk about some of the effects of ketones, what ketones are, and I will be talking about Pruvit ketone salts and then answering questions. I'm going to try to cover a lot of questions that we didn't quite get to yesterday. So I think we are probably a minute or two into this. I saw very many of you, I'm sure, at the Dallas Epic event. There were 1,500 people there at the end of January, and it was a very, very exciting event in which the newest product, the Swiss cacao version of Keto Max, was released, and I was just so impressed with how many people donated how much money in a very short period of time for ketone research. It was very, very impressive, and so many messengers now to increase awareness of what ketones can potentially do to improve people's lives. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm going to try to go over this a little bit quickly compared to yesterday. But back in 2008, I really didn't know too much about ketones. I was familiar with it from my medical training, that it had been used, the ketogenic diet, now for almost 100 years to treat children with epilepsy. And really that was the limits of my knowledge about ketones and ketogenic diet. So what happened was in 2008, my husband, who had early onset Alzheimer's disease, was on a downward spiral. He was an accountant. He worked at home from my practice and took care of our children there. He said it was the best job he ever had. But in 2001, when he was only 51, he began having symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and this just progressively worsened over a number of years until 2008, when he was really on a downward spiral. He couldn't finish sentences. He had physical symptoms like tremors. He couldn't complete tasks, just gardening. He would forget if he was digging a hole or putting the dirt back in, and he would take his lawn tractor apart and that kind of thing. So he was not doing well. And so we were looking at getting him into clinical trials, and there were 2 clinical trials for 2 different drugs that I was able to set up screenings for 2 days in a row. And the night before, I started looking at the risks and benefits of these 2 drugs, and I found a press release from a medical food that was about a year away from coming out, and it said that it improved the memories and cognition of nearly half of the people with Alzheimer's that took it. And I had to find out more about what this was. It didn't say what it was or how it worked. So I got onto free patents online, and I found their patent application, and I learned that they were using medium chain triglyceride oil, also called MCT oil, as this medical food. And this rang a bell with me because I'm a neonatologist. I worked for 30 years in Florida taking care of sick and premature newborns, and we used to add it to the feedings of our tiny preemies. And they talked about Alzheimer's disease as diabetes of the brain, and this is a problem in which there is decreased glucose uptake and insulin resistance in the brain of people with Alzheimer's. So the cool thing about MCT oil is that when you consume it, it converts in the liver to ketones. And ketones can provide alternative fuel to the brain. So the 2 basic fuels are glucose and ketones that we use. And on the standard American diet, which tends to be high in carbohydrate, there are we tend to not be in ketosis. We tend to not have ketones except maybe a little bit in the morning when we haven't eaten for 10 or 12 hours. When a person is fasting, or, as our ancient ancestors did, they had periods of famine, and even people today do, you use up the sugar that's stored in your body very quickly, and you start breaking down fat. And much of the fat, the fatty acids can be used by the heart and the muscles, but they don't cross the blood-brain barrier very well. They're not used by the brain directly very well. And so part of the fatty acids are converted in the liver to ketones. And ketones are much smaller molecules, and they're fuel molecules, and they cross the blood-brain barrier, and they can be used very easily by the brain. We've since then learned from Dr. Stephen Cunnane at Sherbrooke University in Canada, that the Alzheimer brain takes up ketones normally. Those areas that do not take up glucose take up ketones normally, providing more evidence that ketones could provide alternative fuel for Alzheimer's. So anyway, back to Steve. I knew what MCT oil was because we add it to the feedings of our preemies, but I didn't know that it was extracted from coconut oil, and coconut oil is 60%, that's 60% medium chain triglycerides. So the first screening, it was really too late when I was learning this information to do anything about it, and he scored too low to qualify for the trial. And he drew a clock that was very random, just a few little numbers, and we were told that he was on the verge of severe Alzheimer's. And so the next day, he tried again. But in the meantime, I had bought coconut oil, and I had learned about it and about the fatty acid composition, and that it was 60% medium chain triglycerides, and gave him an amount of coconut oil that would equal the medical food. And he had a marked increase, 4 extra points on this mini mental status test, and he was accepted into the trial. And then over time, we just saw ongoing improvements. He said it was like a light bulb came on in his head the day he started taking coconut oil. And then we just saw improvements in his physical symptoms, in his personality, his ability to make conversation. Over a 9 to 10 month period, he continued to improve, and then he stabilized. After a couple years when he had a setback, he actually was in a trial of by Dr. Veach of the ketone ester, which gets very, very high levels of ketones potentially, but it's not available yet on the market. And the ketone ester actually helped him turn around and stabilize for another almost 20 months. Ultimately, Steve did lose his battle with Alzheimer's, and his birthday was yesterday, February 8th. He would have been 67 years old, and I miss my dear husband. We were using coconut and MCT oil primarily, and now I kind of think of that as the foundation. You can get levels of ketones, but they're relatively low with coconut and MCT oil, and I kind of think of them as a foundation, something that you could make a staple in the diet to raise ketones. But now the Pruvit company has been marketing, and they're the first company to do this, ketone salts, that became available just about a year ago in January of 2016, widely available on the market. And they have done a terrific job of promoting the idea of ketosis to bring about benefits for people. And they have several different products. One of them is coconut and MCT powder, and it's in a product called Keto Cream. And I happen to like this one a lot, and I think it's very useful. These packets are great, for people that are traveling, for example, or need to take something to work with them. But also, I think a lot about the elderly population, and this would be great for somebody that's in assisted living, that they could use Keto Cream in the morning. So then the next product they put out was, actually, that's not the first product they put out, but the important product that they put out is Keto OS, and Keto OS contains the actual ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate. So when you break down fat or when you consume medium chain triglyceride oil, one of the ketones your body converts that fat to is beta hydroxybutyrate. And that is the ketone that becomes very elevated over a 10 to 20 day period when people are starving or fasting. The brain can very easily switch over from using glucose to ketones. So this is really the first product of its kind that's available out on the market that contains beta hydroxybutyrate, the actual ketone. And it provides what is now being called instant ketosis. It quickly raises ketone levels so that a person can reach, like say with coconut or MCT oil, it might be 0.3 to 0.5 millimoles. With Ketosis, it could be 0.7 and even more than 1 millimole. So quite a bit higher than what you can get with coconut and MCT oil. The Orange Dream also contains MCT oil, and which further increases ketone levels. Then they came out with their next product, and this is the chocolate swirl, and this one does not have MCT, but does have branched chain amino acids, which also convert to ketones. So this is a very neat way of providing some extra amino acids, which are used in the making of muscle tissue. And then in the fall, they came out with, I believe it was in the fall, the Keto Max. And so when you talk about beta hydroxybutyrate, there are two forms of it. And one form, D-beta hydroxybutyrate, is the main form of it that is in the circulation when you're breaking down fat that is naturally there. And Keto Max contains a much higher percentage of D-beta hydroxybutyrate. So it has the potential to more efficiently increase ketone levels. And now at the end of January, they released Swiss cacao flavor, which I'm very excited about. It actually tastes very good, and I plan to use it myself. So what do ketones do? I mean, how do they work? We already talked about alternative fuel for the brain. So there are a number of conditions in which there is decreased glucose uptake in the brain. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, autism. There are studies showing that there's decreased glucose uptake in the brain. So ketones could potentially provide alternative fuel in these diseases. And the ketogenic diets have actually been studied and shown positive results in many of these conditions. The other way is that ketones have been shown to reduce inflammation. There are many diseases that, including the ones I just mentioned, as well as many other types of diseases that people suffer from that involve inflammation. I'm thinking of things like fibromyalgia. High blood pressure is inflammation on the inside of the arteries, and that really is probably the biggest source of having a heart attack. So reducing inflammation is, very important to trying to improve with certain conditions. So ketones have been shown to reduce inflammation. Ketones have been shown to reduce blood sugar. And when blood sugar goes down, insulin levels go down too. So ketones reduce blood sugar and insulin levels. And while we're talking about that, I just want to mention that there were a lot of questions about people with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And I think it is important for people with a condition like that, for example, to get their doctor involved, use it cautiously, start with a small amount and increase slowly. Monitor the blood sugar closely because many people will see a decrease in their blood sugar. And the doctor may need to help you adjust medications if you're diabetic, for example. So, but this is also important, reducing blood sugar and insulin levels for people that want to lose fat. And this is one of the mechanisms by which ketones can help reduce fat in the body. If you lower the blood sugar and lower the insulin levels, your body will start burning fat and will start using fat as your primary fuel. This will, basically encourage you to start losing some fat. And especially if you combine it with a very low carbohydrate diet, and that would be eliminating the sweets and the starchy foods in the diet, like pastas and breads, soda that contains sugar, which is extremely high in sugar, probably very damaging as far as causing inflammation. And basically lowering blood sugar and insulin levels can help burn fat. Also, ketones, insulin puts fat on our bodies. It puts fat on our bodies and keeps it there. And just one example that I was very familiar with were infants of diabetic mothers. So these are women that become diabetic during the pregnancy. And these babies get very fat. They often weigh 9, 10 pounds. I've even had up to 13 and 14-pound babies who were born to women that had diabetes. And basically, one of the important functions of insulin is to put fat on our body. Well, if you're a type 2 diabetic and you tend to have very, very high insulin levels. You're considered to be insulin resistant. Your cells are not responding to insulin, and you just are putting out more and more insulin to try to metabolize the sugar that you're eating. So, basically, insulin puts fat on your body. Lowering insulin levels and lowering blood sugar levels can help you get rid of it. And ketones actually cause breakdown of fat during starvation. And the fat then is transported to the liver to make more ketones. So one of the other questions that has come up is diabetic ketoacidosis, and we talked about this somewhat yesterday. People are worried if using a product like the ketone salts from Pruvit could cause somebody to go into ketoacidosis. And really, the levels of ketones that you get from taking this product are probably somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 or 2 millimoles. If you're on a low carbohydrate diet, it could go higher than that. Diabetic ketoacidosis is a much, much higher level of ketones, usually 20 to 25 millimoles, so 10 to 15 times higher. And it occurs in a situation when a type 1 diabetic or an insulin-dependent diabetic is out of control. They're not taking insulin, the blood sugar is very high, extremely high, and ketones start pouring out. They're being made rapidly in the liver to compensate for that. So it's a very abnormal condition, and really, unless you're on the verge of that condition, there is extremely low risk that this would cause you to go into diabetic ketoacidosis. So, but again, if you're diabetic, it would be important to monitor your blood sugar levels, and you can monitor ketone levels. Ketones can be monitored by using a urine dipstick, which actually does not measure beta hydroxybutyrate, but it does measure acetoacetate, which also becomes elevated. There's a breath analyzer that is either out on the market or soon to come out on the market that measures the ketone called acetone, which you exhale mainly. And to measure beta hydroxybutyrate directly, there are there are little monitors, very much like blood sugar monitors that you can buy over the counter, and you can buy ketone strips over the counter. And you can measure beta hydroxybutyrate directly. So if someone, for example, has diabetes and they're worried about tipping themselves over into diabetic ketoacidosis, they can monitor their blood sugar and their ketone levels when they're taking this. So talking about people with chronic conditions, I just strongly recommend that anyone who has a chronic medical condition, such as heart disease, kidney disease, liver disease, diabetes, that or an elderly person, that they consult with their physician, and that they start very slowly with taking this product, maybe 1 or 2 teaspoons, and increasing a little bit each day. The other important thing is that a person taking this needs to be able to take plenty of liquids. So that means somewhere on the order of uh, 10 8-ounce glasses of water a day for the average person. If you're smaller than that, you might not need quite as much. If you're a larger person or a very active person, you might need more water. But in general, it's very important to take plenty of fluids. And the reasons for that are, one, that when you're on a ketogenic diet or raised ketones, it tends to have a bit of a diuretic effect, which means you lose water from your body. And you can also lose certain salts like sodium, calcium, and magnesium. So one of the neat things about this product is that the ketone beta hydroxybutyrate is bound to salts, including sodium, calcium, and magnesium. So it can partly replenish, some of those minerals that might be lost in people who are on a ketogenic diet or in ketosis. So again, a doctor can monitor these if you're worried about these. Some people actually find that they need to take even a little bit more supplementation when they take this, or they find that the amounts in the product are sufficient, for them. So another way that ketones can help lose fat are that ketones have been found in research to suppress appetite. And it's not known really exactly how that happens. It's believed that it might be some effect on the hormones that have to do with hunger. But, and many people have reported directly to me as well, that they do see suppression of their appetite. So if you're trying to lose fat, I mean, that's a great advantage to not be hungry while you're trying to lose weight. Also, one of the other interesting things about ketones is that they change white fat, which is the typical fat, like if you see chicken fat, that's white fat, to brown fat. And brown fat is a very active fat that helps, it basically produces heat in our body. So if you're cold and you start shivering, you'll start breaking down brown fat. So it's a very active type of fat. Another kind of interesting thing about ketones. So I think what I'm going to do is just try to answer some questions. There are a couple more minutes. I think the main thing is, let's see, what happens when you stop taking Keto OS? Will it reverse ketosis? Yeah, it's instant ketosis. If you're not on a low carbohydrate diet, probably within 24 or 48 hours, you'll see a drop again in your ketone level. If you're on a very low carbohydrate diet, you might be able to maintain ketosis without it. But I think it's an advantage to take it if you want to burn fat, increase ketone levels for the other benefits. Many people report just an overall increase in energy, that they sleep better, that they feel better. Some of those things are really hard to put your finger on, but I personally feel like I've experienced that myself, that I am sleeping better and I feel better when I take this product. There are questions about women who are pregnant taking this product. Well, I think that really needs to specifically be studied. But as we think about our history as human beings, we were probably in ketosis for most of human history. People, until about 10,000 years ago, there wasn't even much in the way of agriculture. That's when grains started to be grown. About 10,000 years ago. And before that, people would have been eating proteins from animals, eggs, possibly, if they had domesticated cows, they might have milk or goats, goat milk, that type of thing. But they would have been getting very little grain just from their gathering, and mainly eating vegetables and occasionally fruit when it was available. So, most of the time, in our history, people would have been on a very low carbohydrate diet, and it's really only about the last 200 years that sugar has been greatly increased in our diet. I read a study that in around 1820, the consumption of added sugar was about 6 pounds per person per year, and that it was the wealthy people who actually had access to sugar. Now it's more like 130 pounds a year. of added sugar in our diet. So something has really gone haywire the last 50 or 60 years. And, when you talk about why there's so much more diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure and those types of things, a big part of it is very likely the extreme amount of sugar that we have in our diet. So I just want to encourage you to consider also reducing the sugar in your diet while you're taking this product, just for overall health benefits. Let's see. There were some questions about children. And again, the beta hydroxybutyrate is a naturally occurring molecule. And the minerals that are in this are minerals that are normally found in our body. So it is a natural type of product. And I think, with a child, you can consider, again, you have to consider that a baby, or a child is much, much smaller than an adult. So you have to act accordingly and really start out with a tinier amount. I think in a younger child, I would start maybe even with a quarter or a half of a teaspoon if you're going to do this. And just trying to think, is this beneficial, for children in general? I don't really have the answer to that question. I think, there need to be studies done. Some of the diseases that affect childhood, autism, sometimes epilepsy, there is decreased glucose uptake in the brain. There is inflammation in these diseases. So some of these things I feel belong in the category of what do you have to lose. And again, I would get the pediatrician involved if you're talking about a child. And so that if there are concerns, you can monitor electrolytes before and maybe a month or so afterwards. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap it up. I think we're actually getting a little bit over the half-hour mark. And I just want to make everybody aware who doesn't know that there is going to be a great event taking place in Orlando, Florida, beginning on March 30th and 31st. There will be the next Keto Academy, and the Keto Academy events are great because it brings together, some of the world leaders in this idea of ketones as alternative fuel for the brain and for its other benefits. And they talk, they will be making presentations, and you'll get an opportunity to meet them. I've just been so excited about how many people I've gotten to meet. I was just blown away the first time I came. It was an event in San Diego at the end of May, and I met so many people who were telling me about so many benefits that they had gotten for many different reasons. I'm just excited as, someone who's been a messenger for trying to increase awareness of ketones as an alternative fuel for the brain since 2008, to see so many other people who are so interested in it. And these numbers are just growing. They're growing. Every event I go to, there are more and more people. And like I said at the beginning, at the Dallas event at the end of January, there were 1,500 people. That is just mind-boggling to me that the message is now getting out so far and wide. So I hope you'll join me. I plan to be there at the end of March at the Keto Academy in Orlando. And I know that that's followed by the More event, which is a motivational and business type of event. Also a very exciting type of event for people that are interested in promoting, using and promoting ketone salts. So I'm going to sign off now, and just want to thank the Pruvit company for coming out with this wonderful product and for doing so much to try to educate people and increase awareness. Goodbye, everybody. See you next time.